Welcome to Scared Stories for a Rainy Night. As a reminder, before we begin, there are minimum ads in this entire video, so you can relax, sleep, and listen to the video without interruptions. I really hope you enjoy, and lastly, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thank you. Hey everyone, it's Ricky Larkin here, and I want to share something that still gives me chills every time I think about it. I work as a long-haul truck driver, which means I spend a lot of time alone on the road, especially at night. Most people think it's a lonely job, but it's the solitude that I enjoy. It gives me time to think. But one night, that peace was shattered, and I still don't know how to explain what happened. It was late October, and I was on my way back from a delivery in the Midwest, heading toward the East Coast. The moon hung low in a clear sky, illuminating the highway as I drove through the desolate stretch of Route 66, a road steeped in whispers of the past. I had just passed a sign that read, "No services for 100 miles," when my radio flickered and died. I shrugged it off. Just a glitch, I thought. About an hour later, I spotted headlights in my rearview mirror. A car was tailing me closely, and I felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't unusual for other drivers to be on the road at this hour, but this car seemed different. It was an old model, a dark sedan that looked like it had seen better days. I tried to shake the feeling and focused on the road ahead. Suddenly the car accelerated, speeding up alongside me. I glanced over and saw a figure in the passenger seat, a woman with long, unkempt hair, her face obscured by shadows. She was staring directly at me, her eyes wide and unblinking. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I couldn't speed up. I was driving a heavy rig, and it wouldn't be safe. The woman leaned closer to the window, and I could see her mouth moving, but I couldn't hear her over the roar of the engine. I turned up my radio, hoping to drown out the creeping anxiety, but the static was deafening. I took a deep breath, reminding myself it was just my overactive imagination. After all, I was in the middle of nowhere. As we continued down the highway, the sedan kept pace, its headlights blinding me in the dark. I felt trapped, like I was in some twisted game. I decided to pull over at a rest area, to catch my breath, and hopefully lose the car. As I parked, I glanced back, only to find the sedan had vanished. I felt a sense of relief wash over me, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. After a quick break, I climbed back into my truck, determined to put the whole experience behind me. But as I set off, I noticed something strange. The moon was now covered by dark clouds, and the atmosphere felt heavier, almost suffocating. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and my heart began to race. Minutes turned into hours as I drove, and just when I thought I was finally calming down, I spotted another set of headlights in my mirror. It was the same sedan. My heart sank. I could feel panic rising within me as the car pulled up next to me again. This time, the woman was gone, but a man was in the driver's seat, his face pale and gaunt, with sunken eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. As the man drove closer, the static on my radio returned, and then I heard it. A voice, faint and whispering. "Help me. Help us." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and my instincts kicked in. I pressed down on the accelerator, trying to outrun this apparition. But no matter how fast I drove, the sedan matched my speed, the voice growing louder, more desperate. Finally, in a fit of adrenaline, I swerved off the highway onto a dirt road, hoping to lose him. The truck bounced violently over the uneven terrain, but I didn't dare look back. I felt like I was in a nightmare, my heart racing as I fought to control the vehicle. Then just as suddenly as it had started, the road opened up into a clearing. I slammed to a stop, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I got out of the truck and looked around, the silence overwhelming. There was no sign of the sedan, I was finally alone. But something caught my eye. A large, weathered sign that read, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Confused, I took a step closer to the sign when I felt a presence behind me. I turned quickly, and there she was, the woman from the passenger seat, standing just a few feet away, her face twisted in anguish. "Help us," she whispered, reaching out a hand. My heart raced, but I hesitated. In that moment, I remembered the stories I'd heard about this stretch of road, that it was haunted by souls lost in tragic accidents. Suddenly, everything clicked. The twisted fate of those who had vanished into the night. In a panic, I jumped back into my truck and peeled out. I didn't stop driving until the sun broke over the horizon. I made it home safely, but every night since then, I hear their whispers in the static of my radio. I've tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I know the truth. The road is never really empty. It's just waiting for the next lost soul to join its ranks. So, if you ever find yourself driving down Route 66 at night, remember my story. You may think you're alone, but there are some who never truly leave, and they're always watching, waiting for someone to help them find peace. Stay safe out there, my friends. I'm Sam Hargrove, a 28-year-old night shift delivery driver. It's a job that keeps me on the move, and while I've been on the road at odd hours for years, nothing could have prepared me for the night that changed everything. It was a stormy Tuesday in late October. The winds howled like banshees, and rain hammered against my van's roof as I made my way through the winding back roads of Elmwood. The townsfolk whispered about these roads. They were said to be haunted, filled with stories of mysterious disappearances and ghostly apparitions, but I never believed in that nonsense until tonight. My last delivery was to a decrepit old house at the end of a long, overgrown driveway. The house loomed like a shadow, its windows dark and hollow, as if the very walls were holding their breath. I pulled up, the headlights cutting through the rain like a knife, illuminating the peeling paint and shattered porch. I checked the address twice. It was correct. A part of me wanted to drive away, but the other part, the one driven by curiosity and the need for a paycheck, urged me to knock. I grabbed the package, a small, nondescript box wrapped in brown paper, and stepped out into the storm. The door creaked open before I could knock, revealing a frail old woman, her hair a wild tangle of silver, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling brightness. "You've come," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "Finally, someone has come." I handed her the package, feeling a chill creep up my spine. Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't respond, just stared at the box as if it were a long-lost treasure. Suddenly, the wind howled louder, and the door swung open wider, revealing a dark, cluttered interior. "Come in, dear," she beckoned, her bony fingers curling like claws. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind me. The air inside was thick and musty, filled with the scent of something rotting. Shadows danced on the walls, cast by the flickering light of a single candle. "I've been waiting for someone to deliver this," she said, her voice a threadbare whisper. "It's time to fulfill the promise." "Promise?" I asked, heart racing. "What promise?" She moved closer, and I could see her eyes glinting with madness. "The promise of the lost souls. They hunger for a delivery, and you are the chosen one." Before I could react, the room seemed to shift. The shadows grew longer, wrapping around me like tendrils. I stumbled back, the package slipping from my hands and crashing to the floor. It burst open. revealing not objects, but swirling dark mist. It coiled around my ankles, pulling me down. "Join them," she hissed, her face twisting into a grotesque mask of glee. "Embrace the darkness." Panic surged through me, and I fought against the mist. I could hear whispers rising, voices pleading for release. My breath quickened as I realized these were the souls lost to the night, trapped in a cycle of despair. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the door, flinging it open and stumbling back into the rain. I ran, my heart pounding in my chest, the old woman's laughter echoing behind me. I drove off, leaving the house behind, but the feeling of dread clung to me like a shadow. I thought I was safe, but as I turned onto the main road, I glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. Sitting in the back seat, a spectral figure grinned at me, its hollow eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Its mouth moved, whispering the same words the old woman had said. "You've come. Finally, someone has come." I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The world outside warped, the rain becoming a torrential downpour, and the last thing I remember was the figure leaning closer, the darkness closing in. Now, I'm just another lost soul, trapped in a cycle of deliveries, waiting for the next unsuspecting driver to take my place. So, if you ever find yourself on Elmwood's back roads, remember this. Don't stop for the old house at the end of the lane. You might just end up being the delivery. And trust me, you won't like what you're delivering. Hey, I'm Kevin Mercer. This one isn't just a story. It's a recount of my last shift at the old Starlight Theater, an abandoned cinema that's been the center of local legends for decades. It was a cold, foggy night in October 2023. I had secured a night shift at the theater to film a documentary about its haunted past. The old building was said to be a hotspot for paranormal activity, ever since a tragic fire had claimed the lives of several patrons in the late 70s. They say the spirits never left, lingering in the shadows, trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. As I stepped through the crumbling entrance, the air felt heavy, thick with the scent of mold and something metallic. My flashlight flickered against the peeling walls, illuminating faded posters of films long forgotten. I set up my camera in the dilapidated lobby, the eerie silence broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards. I decided to explore the projection room first. This room was notorious for its ghostly tales. People had reported hearing the sound of a projector running, even when no film was in the machine. As I climbed the rickety stairs, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to twist and turn as I moved. Once I reached the top, I noticed the projector was still there, covered in layers of dust. I brushed it off and, on a whim, decided to plug it in. To my shock, the machine whirred to life, flickering images of a long-lost film dancing on the screen. I panicked, quickly adjusting the camera to capture this strange phenomenon. The film showed a crowded theater, the faces of the audience frozen in time, laughing and enjoying their night out. But then, the scene shifted to chaos, the screen filled with screams, fire, and darkness. Suddenly, I heard a voice, a whisper that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. "Help us!" It pleaded, sending a wave of terror through me. I turned around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination running wild. But the whispers persisted, growing louder, more desperate. As I made my way back down, the atmosphere thickened. The shadows danced menacingly, and the temperature dropped even more. It was as if something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. I decided to head to the theater itself, hoping the larger space would ease the claustrophobia creeping in. The grand room was a ghost of its former glory. Rows of decaying seats faced the empty screen, and the stage was obscured by a thick layer of dust. As I stepped forward, the whispers intensified, swirling around me. I could almost make out words, fragments of sentences begging for release. Then I noticed something strange. In the front row, one seat was occupied. A figure sat there, shrouded in darkness, their face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. My blood ran cold. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound brave, but my voice trembled. The figure didn't move, just sat there, an eerie stillness surrounding them. I took a hesitant step closer, and suddenly the lights flickered on, illuminating the theater. But the seat was empty. My heart raced as I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me, locking me inside. Panic surged through me. I banged on the door, shouting for help, but no one could hear me. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of voices, pleading and wailing. In a moment of desperation, I turned back to the screen, and to my horror, the film had changed. Images of the fire flashed before my eyes, but this time I could see the figures trapped inside, faces twisted in terror, reaching out to me. I stumbled back, realizing they were not just ghosts. They were the souls of those who perished, trapped in a never-ending loop of their final moments. And then the figure appeared again, this time standing on the stage, illuminated by a single spotlight. I could see their face, twisted in agony. "You shouldn't have come here," they whispered, their voice a haunting melody. "You're one of us now." Just as I felt the walls closing in, I woke up, gasping for breath. I was in my bed, drenched in sweat, the events of the night flashing before me like a nightmare. I thought it was over, until I glanced at my phone. A notification lit up the screen. New video upload, the last shift. I didn't upload anything. I quickly opened the app, and there it was, a video of the night, complete with the whispers, the figure, everything. I scrolled down to the comments, my heart sinking as I saw the first one. "Welcome to the family, Kevin. I've been trying to escape the theater ever since, but I think it's too late. The spirits have claimed me, and now I'm trapped in their story, destined to haunt the Starlight Theater forever. So, if you ever hear whispers in the dark, don't be like me. Don't go exploring. You might just end up as part of the horror." I never believed in the supernatural. As a night shift paramedic in a small fog-shrouded town, I was too focused on the living and the bleeding to worry about things that went bump in the night. But that all changed on a cold October evening when the phone rang at 2:13 a.m. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got a call at the old Whitmore house. Looks like someone's in trouble. You're the closest unit." The Whitmore house, a place I'd heard whispered about in hushed tones. Abandoned for decades, it was said to be haunted by the family that had mysteriously vanished one stormy night. My partner Tom was already on edge, but I figured it was just another call, just another broken body in a town that had seen too many of them. As we pulled up to the house, the wind howled through the trees, sending chills down my spine. The moon was hidden behind dark clouds, and the air felt thick with something unspoken. I glanced at Tom. He was staring at the house, his face pale as if he'd seen a ghost. "Let's just get this over with," I said, trying to shake off the unease creeping in. We stepped out of the ambulance, the gravel crunching under our boots. The front door of the Whitmore house stood slightly ajar, creaking ominously in the wind. I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. No response, just the sound of the wind and the rustle of leaves. As we entered, the stale air hit us like a wall. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and dust danced in the beam of my flashlight. I felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. "Maybe it's just a prank?" Tom whispered, his voice barely above a whisper. But as we moved deeper into the house, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then I heard it, a soft whimper, like a child crying. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. Tom nodded, his face pale. We followed the sound to a room at the end of the hallway. The door was closed, but it was slightly ajar, just like the front door. I pushed it open, and what I saw made my stomach drop. In the center of the room, surrounded by old furniture, was a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 6, with long, tangled hair and a nightgown that looked a century old. She was sitting on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What's wrong, sweetie?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. She looked up at me with wide, haunted eyes. "They won't let me leave," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Who won't let you leave?" I pressed, casting a glance at Tom, who was now stepping back, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Before she could answer, the room grew colder. A shadow flickered behind her, and I felt an icy breeze brush past me. I turned my head, but there was nothing there, just empty darkness. Suddenly, the girl's expression changed. She grinned, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice now echoing, layered with something sinister. I stood up, adrenaline kicking in. "Tom, we need to go. Now." But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut. I rushed to it, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The girl's laughter echoed around the room, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Let us out!" I shouted, pounding on the door. The laughter stopped abruptly, and the air grew heavy. The girl stood up, her form shifting, becoming indistinct, like a flickering candle. "You're not leaving. Not until you know the truth." "What truth?" I demanded, panic rising. In an instant, a vision flooded my mind. Images of the Whitmore family, their faces twisted in horror as they were dragged into the darkness, their screams silenced. I stumbled back, gasping, realizing the truth. They hadn't vanished. They had become a part of this house, trapped within its walls, just like the little girl. "Join us," she whispered, her voice now a haunting melody. "You can't save anyone here. You're just like them." Just then, the door swung open, and the cold night air rushed in. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out, leaving Tom behind. I ran to the ambulance, my heart pounding, the girl's voice echoing in my mind. But as I reached the driver's seat, I glanced back at the house. The girl stood in the doorway, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. She raised her hand, waving goodbye, and in that moment, I knew I'd never forget her. Weeks passed, and I tried to put it behind me, but every night I heard whispers in the dark, and every time my phone rang, I feared it would be another call from the Whitmore house. Then one night, it happened. The phone rang at 2:13 a.m. "Paramedic 47, we've got a call at the Whitmore house," the dispatcher said, oblivious to the dread that filled my chest. "Please." "No," I whispered, but it was too late. As I drove through the fog, the realization struck me like a thunderbolt. I was destined to return. I was already part of the haunting. And as I stepped into the Whitmore house once again, I felt a familiar chill. The girl was waiting, her smile wide, her eyes gleaming. "Welcome home," she said softly, and I knew then that I would never leave. The clock struck 11 p.m. on a bitterly cold November night. I, Eleanor Graves, had always loved working the graveyard shift at the old Beechwood Asylum. The sprawling, crumbling building had a history that sent shivers down the spine of even the most seasoned staff. Yet, for me, it was just another night in the life of a night nurse. The asylum had been abandoned for the past decade, save for a few of us who volunteered to keep watch over the remaining sick and twisted souls that still lingered within its decaying walls. The patients were rarely seen, hidden away in the darkest corners of the building, their whispers echoing through the halls like distant haunting melodies. As I made my rounds that night, the wind howled through the broken windows, creating an eerie symphony that danced with the shadows. I passed room 13, the one that held the most notorious patient, an old man named Harold, who claimed to be over 100 years old. They said he was the reason the asylum was shut down. He had a way of getting inside your head, twisting your thoughts until you couldn't tell reality from madness. "Good evening, Harold," I called, peering through the small glass window in his door. His eyes glinted in the dim light, a smile creeping across his wrinkled face. "How are you tonight?" "Just waiting for the hour to strike, Eleanor," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "The hour when the shadows come to life." I chuckled nervously, brushing off his words as the ramblings of a madman. But as the night wore on and the clock ticked closer to midnight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. Around 11:30, I headed down to the basement to check the storage room. The asylum had been a labyrinth of secrets, and the basement felt like it held the darkest of those secrets. I flicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dense darkness. As I turned the corner, the air grew colder, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the far end of the room. Heart racing, I cautiously approached, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I rounded a corner and found a pile of old medical equipment toppled over. It looked as if someone had been rummaging through it. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just the sound of my own breathing and the oppressive silence pressing in around me. I turned to leave, but a flicker of movement caught my eye. At the far end of the room stood a shadowy figure, barely illuminated by my flashlight. "Who's there?" I demanded, panic rising in my throat. The figure didn't move, its form shifting like smoke in the air. I blinked and it was gone, leaving only an unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach. Rushing back upstairs, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. The asylum was known for its tricks. I returned to the nurse's station, where the clock glowed ominously at 11:45 p.m. I tried to distract myself with paperwork, but the shadows danced around me, and an undeniable dread settled in my bones. Then, at exactly midnight, the power flickered and went out, plunging the building into darkness. My heart raced as I fumbled for my flashlight, the cold sweat gathering on my brow. I could hear faint whispering from the halls, the voices growing louder, overlapping into a cacophony of despair. "Help us, Eleanor," they cried, as if the very walls were alive with the tortured souls of the patients who once roamed here. I stumbled out of the nurse's station, flashlight in hand, and headed for the source of the voices. They led me back to room 13, where Harold's door stood ajar, swaying slightly as if beckoning me inside. "Eleanor," he called, his voice smooth and inviting. "You've come just in time. The shadows are hungry." With shaking hands, I pushed the door fully open. Inside, the room was lit by an ethereal glow, and to my horror, I saw the shadows, swirling and writhing, creeping toward me. Harold stood in the center, a grotesque grin stretched across his face. "You've freed them," he whispered, and I realized too late what he meant. The shadows were not just figments of my imagination, they were the spirits of the patients, trapped and seeking vengeance. "Eleanor, join us," Harold urged, extending a hand. "You've been chosen." The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I was the last nurse left, the last tether to the living world, and they wanted me to take their place. As the shadows closed in, I felt their cold fingers brush my skin, pulling me into their dark embrace. But in that moment, I remembered the journal I had found in the archives, filled with Harold's notes about the asylum's dark experiments. I had the power to end this. With a surge of adrenaline, I shouted, "No, you won't take me!" I turned and ran, the shadows clawing at my heels. I burst out of the room, sprinting toward the emergency exit. The whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of rage and sorrow, as the shadows tried to pull me back. I could feel their desperation, their pain, but I pushed forward, bursting through the exit into the cold night air. As I collapsed on the grass outside, gasping for breath, I thought I had escaped. But looking back at the asylum, I saw Harold standing in the window, his smile wider than ever. He raised his hand, and for the briefest moment, I saw the shadows swirling around him, whispering my name. And that's when I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped at all. I was now part of the asylum, forever entwined with its dark legacy. The last nurse, destined to guard the secrets of Beechwood Asylum as the shadows awaited their next victim. My name is Felix Mercer, and I've always been a skeptic. A journalist by trade, I spent my days chasing stories and seeking the truth hidden behind layers of sensationalism. But nothing could prepare me for the tale that unfolded in Eldridge Hollow, a town that seemed to exist outside of time, where the shadows whispered secrets and the past clung to the present like a shroud. It was a chill autumn evening when I first arrived, the air crisp with the scent of decaying leaves. I had come to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances that had plagued the town for generations. Locals spoke of eerie echoes in the night and flickering lights in the old Brooks mansion, a dilapidated estate on the edge of town. The mansion had been abandoned for decades, its windows like dark eyes watching the world with a malevolent gaze, and it was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who had vanished. As I approached the mansion, my heart raced. The path was overgrown, the weeds reclaiming the land, but I pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. I pulled out my flashlight and shone its beam into the darkness. The light danced across the cracked walls, revealing faded portraits of the Brooks family, their eyes following me as I moved deeper into the house. It was as if they were judging my intrusion, silently warning me to leave. The air inside was thick with dust and despair. I could hear the creaking of the floorboards beneath my feet and the occasional flutter of something unseen. I set up my recording equipment, hoping to capture any unusual sounds. As I wandered from room to room, I discovered remnants of a life once lived, a tarnished silver spoon, a broken clock frozen at midnight, and a child's toy, its paint chipped and colors faded. Each item whispered a story of its own, but the most chilling sensation was the feeling of being watched. Hours passed, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I decided to explore the basement. The air grew colder as I descended the stairs, the beam of my flashlight trembling in the oppressive darkness. I could hear a faint whispering echoing through the damp walls. "Felix! Felix!" It was my name, but there was no one else here. I pressed on, my curiosity piqued. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, guiding me deeper into the crypt-like corridors. I reached a heavy wooden door that creaked ominously when I pushed it open. Inside was a small chamber, the walls lined with photographs of the missing townsfolk, their faces forever frozen in time. In the center of the room stood a dusty altar, littered with offerings, wilted flowers, trinkets, and what appeared to be a journal. I picked up the journal, its pages fragile and yellowed, and began to read. It belonged to a woman named Eliza Brooks, the last resident of the mansion. She had chronicled the disappearances, documenting her descent into madness, as she believed that the shadows were alive, feeding on the souls of the lost. They crave companionship, she wrote, and I fear I am next. Suddenly, the whispering escalated into a cacophony, a chorus of lost souls crying out for help. I dropped the journal, panic flooding my veins. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind me. The shadows coalesced, dark tendrils reaching out, gripping my arms and legs. I was being pulled toward the altar. In that moment of sheer terror, I remembered something Eliza had written. To break the curse, one must confront the shadows. With every ounce of strength, I fought against the darkness, screaming out, "I'm not afraid of you!" The shadows hesitated, and for a brief moment, I felt a warmth enveloping me, as if the spirits were considering my defiance. Then, with a deafening roar, the room exploded with light. I stumbled backward, and the shadows recoiled, revealing a hidden passageway behind the altar. I dashed through the opening, the whispers fading behind me as I emerged back into the mansion's hallway. Gasping for breath, I ran toward the front door, throwing it open and collapsing onto the porch. The night air was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness within. Once outside, I looked back at the mansion, its silhouette looming ominously against the moonlit sky. I thought I was free, but as I turned to leave Eldridge Hollow, a chilling realization washed over me. Each of the missing townsfolk had been trapped in that house, their souls entwined with the shadows that lingered, and I had been marked as one of them. Weeks later, as I sat in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Strange occurrences plagued my nights, flickering lights, whispers in the dark, and shadows that moved without cause. One evening, as I prepared to pen my article about Eldridge Hollow, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. My eyes were different, darker, as if something had taken root within me. And then it hit me, the twist that would redefine everything. I was never meant to escape. The shadows had been waiting for a new host, and I had unwittingly invited them into my life. As the whispers grew louder, I understood my fate. I had become the new guardian of the Brooks mansion, the next keeper of its dark secrets, destined to watch as others fell victim to the same horror I had once sought to expose. Now, every night, as I lie awake, I hear their voices calling to me, beckoning me back to Eldridge Hollow. The cycle would continue, and I could only hope that someone out there would uncover the truth before it was too late. But deep down, I knew that the mansion would always call to me, and the shadows would always whisper my name. My name is Victor Mallory, a night janitor at the dilapidated Willow Creek Asylum, a place where shadows linger and whispers echo down the hall. It was a job I took after losing my previous one due to downsizing. The pay was decent, and the hours were always quiet. Too quiet, I sometimes thought. But I needed the money, and the solitude seemed a perfect fit for my introverted nature. On my first night, I received a warning from an old colleague, a grizzled man named Sam who had worked there for over a decade. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of cigarettes. "You hear things, Victor. The place has a history. Don't let it get to you." I chuckled, dismissing his words as the ramblings of a superstitious old man. How scary could a building be? It was just a job. The first few nights passed uneventfully. I mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and navigated the dusty corridors lined with peeling paint and rusting metal. The fluorescent lights flickered ominously, but I was used to that. It wasn't until the fourth night that things started to change. As I was cleaning the common room, I heard a faint whisper, almost like a child's giggle. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. No response. Just the echo of my own voice bouncing back at me. I shook my head, attributing it to fatigue. I had been working long hours and hadn't slept much. But then it happened again, a soft giggle, this time more distinct. It seemed to come from the direction of the abandoned wing of the asylum, a place that had been closed off for years after a fire had damaged it beyond repair. My curiosity piqued. I decided to investigate. As I approached the locked door that separated the common area from the abandoned wing, I felt an icy draft slip through the cracks. Something compelled me to push the door, and surprisingly, it creaked open, revealing a dark corridor lined with charred walls. I stepped inside, my heart racing as I pulled out my flashlight. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, illuminating the remnants of what had once been a children's ward. Lingering shadows danced along the walls, and the atmosphere thickened with an unsettling feeling. The whispering intensified, sounding almost like a chorus of children singing a lullaby. I followed the sound down the hall, my feet moving almost involuntarily. Suddenly, I stumbled upon a room at the end of the corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and the giggling was louder now, almost insistent. I pushed the door open, my breath catching in my throat. Inside, the room was filled with dusty toys strewn about. Dolls with missing eyes, rusted tricycles, and a teddy bear that seemed to watch me with an unsettling gaze. In the center of the room stood a small girl, her back turned to me, her hair long and tangled. The giggling stopped, and she turned slowly, revealing a face that was pale as moonlight. "Play with us," she whispered, her voice echoing eerily in the room. I took a step back, panic flooding my veins. Who are you?" I stammered. But she didn't answer. Instead, she gestured towards the toys, her eyes glinting with a strange light. The atmosphere shifted, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. In that moment, the room darkened, and I realized I was not alone. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, children with hollow eyes and twisted smiles surrounding me, their whispers growing louder and more insistent. "Play with us! Stay with us!" I turned to flee, but the door slammed shut behind me. I pounded on it, desperation clawing at my throat as the children closed in, their laughter echoing ominously. Just as I thought I would be swallowed by the darkness, I spotted a glimmer of light, my flashlight. I grabbed it and shone it at the children. To my horror, the light revealed their true forms. Their skin was gray and decaying, their smiles too wide, almost grotesque. I stumbled backward, fear taking over, and in that moment, I remembered Sam's warning. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. With a surge of adrenaline, I charged at the door, slamming my shoulder against it. It creaked open, and I bolted into the corridor, the sounds of their laughter echoing behind me. I ran through the asylum, heart racing, desperate to escape the haunted past that had ensnared me. As I reached the exit, I glanced back only once. The children stood at the doorway, their faces twisted in a haunting smile, whispering, "You'll be back, Victor. You'll always return." I stumbled out into the night, gasping for breath, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I never returned to Willow Creek Asylum after that night. The job was gone, but the memories lingered, haunting me like the shadows that danced in the corners of my mind. Months later, I saw an ad for a new janitor position at Willow Creek. The the same place I had once feared. I couldn't help but feel drawn to it, as if the asylum itself was calling me back. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the application. Then I chuckled, thinking of Sam's warning, and closed the tab. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was already a part of Willow Creek, just as much as the children who still played in the shadows. And perhaps, one day, I would answer their call. My name is Alara Finch, and I'm a curatorial assistant at a small, obscure museum dedicated to the strange and unusual. Nestled in the shadow of a crumbling old castle, the museum attracts only the most curious of souls. For the most part, I love my job, but what I discovered one fateful night changed everything. It was a stormy Saturday evening in October, the kind of night where the wind howls like a banshee and rain pelts the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. I was working late, cataloging a new collection of artifacts that had arrived from an unknown estate in England. Among them was a peculiar mirror, its frame intricately carved with what appeared to be ancient runes. I was drawn to it, despite an unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. As I wiped the dust from the glass, a chill swept through the room. The reflection stared back at me, but it wasn't just my own face looking back. It was different. Shadows seemed to twist and warp behind me, forming ghostly figures that flickered in and out of sight. I shook my head, blaming it on the dim light and my overactive imagination. I turned away to grab my notebook, but when I glanced back, the mirror seemed to shimmer, and I could have sworn I saw a hand reaching out from its depths. I laughed nervously, chalking it up to fatigue. It had been a long week after all, but as I continued to work, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the old building echoed like a warning. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper calling my name. I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the mirror. Hours passed, and the storm raged on outside. The power flickered, then went out entirely, plunging the museum into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the blackness like a knife. As I turned it towards the mirror, my breath hitched. In the reflection, I saw myself, only I didn't look quite right. My eyes were sunken, and my skin was pale, almost translucent. I blinked hard, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light. But then I saw something else, a figure standing behind me, cloaked in shadows. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart raced as I turned back to the mirror. The figure was now closer, its mouth moving as if it were trying to speak. I leaned in, straining to hear. "Alara," it whispered, a voice like ice scraping against bone. I stumbled back, my flashlight trembling in my grasp. The figure mirrored my movements, its eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that froze me in place. I took a shaky step forward, compelled by some invisible force. "What do you want?" I barely managed to whisper. The figure raised a hand, and I felt a sudden pull, as if the mirror was trying to draw me in. Just then, a loud crash echoed through the museum, snapping me out of my trance. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, as the lights flickered back to life. I blinked against the brightness and turned to face the mirror again, but the figure was gone. Only my reflection stared back, calm and unassuming. Shaking, I decided it was time to leave. I packed my things and made my way to the exit, but as I reached for the door, a voice called out from behind me, "Alara!" I spun around to face the mirror one last time, and my heart plummeted. The figure had returned, but this time it was grinning, a wide, twisted smile that sent chills down my spine. "You're not leaving," it hissed. In a burst of adrenaline, I bolted for the door, flinging it open and racing into the rain. The storm drummed against the pavement, drowning out my frantic thoughts. I didn't stop until I reached my car, panting and soaked to the bone. As I drove away, I glanced into the rearview mirror. My reflection smiled back at me, a knowing glint in its eyes. I felt a chill creep down my spine as the realization hit me. The figure hadn't just been a reflection, it was me, a darker version, waiting for the right moment to take my place. So, what do you think? Was it all in Alara's mind, or did the mirror hold something sinister? Remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones we can't see. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. My name is Alara Finch, and I've always been an antique appraiser. I have a knack for uncovering treasures hidden within the dusty corners of forgotten attics and estate sales. But nothing could prepare me for what I found during my last appraisal, a collection that would lead me down a path of horror I never expected. It was a dreary autumn afternoon when I received a call from a woman named Mrs. Holloway, the last living relative of a reclusive artist who had passed away a few years back. She wanted me to evaluate the contents of his estate. I was intrigued. The artist was rumored to have created bizarre, unsettling pieces that bordered on the macabre. I sensed there was more to this story than met the eye. As I arrived at the dilapidated mansion, the air felt heavy, almost oppressive. The exterior was cloaked in ivy, and the windows were grimy, as if they had not seen the sun in decades. Mrs. Holloway greeted me, her eyes darting nervously as she led me inside. The moment I stepped over the threshold, a chill crawled up my spine. The house groaned as if it were alive, each creak a whispered warning. Mrs. Holloway guided me to the artist's studio. The room was filled with canvases, each depicting nightmarish scenes, twisted figures contorted in agony, landscapes that seemed to bleed shadows. But one painting caught my eye more than the others. It was a portrait of a girl with hollow eyes and a sinister smile, an unsettling grin that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me. As I examined the other pieces, I noticed an odd collection of small boxes lined up on a shelf. They were intricately carved, each one unique. Mrs. Holloway explained that the artist had a strange obsession. He collected the shadows of the people who visited him. He believed that every person had a shadow worth capturing, she said, her voice trembling. Curiosity piqued, I opened one of the boxes. Inside, I found a small dark mass that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was a shadow, dark and formless, yet somehow it felt like it was writhing in fear. I quickly shut the box, dread pooling in my stomach. "What did he do with these?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He believed they held their darkness, fear, sorrow, regret. He thought if he collected enough, he could harness their power, she replied, shivering. As the sun began to set, casting eerie shadows across the room, I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. But as I turned to head for the door, Mrs. Holloway blocked my path, a twisted smile on her face. "You can't leave, Alara. You're part of his collection now." Panic surged through me. I darted towards the exit, but the door slammed shut. In a frenzy, I turned back to Mrs. Holloway, who stood there, eyes glinting with madness. "Every shadow has a story, and yours is one I've been waiting for." In that moment, I understood. The girl in the painting, the darkness in the boxes, They were not just shadows, they were souls trapped within, victims of the artist's obsession. I had unwittingly walked into a trap, and my own shadow was now at risk. Desperate, I recalled a legend I'd heard about shadows. If you face your fears, you can break the hold they have over you. I took a deep breath, my heart racing, and confronted the darkness that had been lurking in the corners of my mind, my insecurities, my failures. As I did, I felt a strange warmth envelop me, pushing back the chill around me. Suddenly, the walls of the mansion shook, and a blinding light burst forth. Mrs. Holloway screamed as the boxes shattered, releasing the shadows into the night. I felt my own shadow slip from my grasp, but instead of fear, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. As the light faded, I found myself standing alone in the now empty studio. The paintings were gone, the boxes shattered. But as I looked down, I noticed something strange. A small, dark figure curled at my feet. My heart raced as I realized it was my own shadow. But it was different now, somehow lighter, as if freed from the burdens I had carried. I fled the mansion, the door now wide open, and never looked back. The collector's last piece was not an object, but a lesson, that shadows can only hold you if you let them. But sometimes I wonder if Mrs. Holloway is still out there, waiting for her next victim. And every so often, in the dead of night, I can feel a cold presence lingering just behind me, a reminder that shadows never truly disappear. I'm Jonah Mercer, a sound engineer, and I've spent the last few years of my life working on audio restoration for old recordings. My passion lies in uncovering the forgotten stories hidden within the cracks and pops of ancient tapes. But nothing could have prepared me for what I stumbled upon in a dilapidated recording studio in the outskirts of Hallow Grove. It was an autumn afternoon when I received a call about an abandoned studio up for auction. The owner had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind a treasure trove of old tapes and equipment. Curious and eager, I drove out to the isolated location, surrounded by gnarled trees and an unsettling silence that hung in the air like cobwebs. The studio was a decaying shell of what it once was, the walls adorned with peeling paint, and the floors layered with dust. I set up my equipment in a small room filled with stacks of tape reels, each labeled with cryptic titles. As I sifted through them, one particular reel caught my eye, Whispers of the Past. With a mix of excitement and trepidation, I mounted the tape on the old reel-to-reel player. As the machine whirred to life, an eerie static crackled through the speakers, sending a chill down my spine. Then voices emerged from the static, soft and unintelligible at first, gradually forming words. Help. Us. My heart raced. I had listened to countless recordings, but this was different. The voices were desperate, pleading. I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of the haunting sounds. As I adjusted the dials, the audio sharpened, revealing glimpses of what sounded like a group of people, children perhaps, trapped in some sort of nightmare. In the dark? Don't let him find you. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. I couldn't turn it off. I was drawn deeper into the story. The recording continued, detailing an incident from decades ago, where a group of children had vanished from the nearby town, their laughter replaced by the silence of the forest. Rumors had circulated about a malevolent figure that had haunted the woods, preying on the innocent. Suddenly, the audio distorted, and I heard a loud crash outside. The sound jolted me from my focus, and I rushed to the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the ground. My heart pounded as I scanned the surroundings. The trees seemed to lean closer, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for me. I returned to the tape, my hands trembling, and pressed play. The voices grew louder, more frantic. "He's coming! You have to run!" I could feel their panic seep into my bones. I glanced at the clock. It was almost dark. I knew I should leave, but the need to understand was overpowering. As I played the recording, I noticed something strange. The voices began to whisper my name. Jonah. Jonah. My breath hitched. I glanced around the room, half expecting someone to be standing behind me, but there was only the dim light of the dying day. Then the voices shifted again, growing more intense. "He's here! He's here!" Suddenly, the room felt colder, and I could see my breath in the air. The door creaked open, and I turned to find a shadowy figure at the threshold, face obscured by darkness. Frozen in fear, I could only watch as it stepped forward, the whispers amplifying into a deafening scream. I stumbled back, knocking over a stack of tapes, and in that moment of chaos, the recording played its final message. "Jonah, you shouldn't have come here." The figure lunged, and I felt a rush of cold air envelop me. Everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the studio floor, the tape player still running beside me. I sat up, disoriented, and glanced at the clock. It was morning. How long had I been out? I scrambled to my feet, desperate to escape. I bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, something caught my eye. On the wall, where the dust had settled, was a photograph. A group of children, smiling brightly. And standing among them was a familiar face, me. I stumbled back, realization crashing over me. I wasn't just listening to their story, I was a part of it. The echo of Hallow Grove had ensnared me, leaving me to wander its haunted woods, forever a whisper among the lost.